Mid-range monsters are back on the attack. Angels and Phyrexians still dominate the stack.
It only matters if it ladders. Comment below as we walk through the Week 4 recap of Karlov Manor Standard. Oh man, so in Tier 1 world, we see Domain is still on top with Esper Midrange and Dimir Aggro continuing to put up results as well. However, Golgari Midrange has finally had the long-anticipated breakthrough, and Slogurk's back with a brand new combo.
Oh yeah, and in Tier 2 land, we see where Boros Convoke, Bant Toxic, and Azorius Control landed to keep Rakdos Midrange company, as these archetypes continue to shift flex slots in search of the magic combination of cards.
Last but not least, we have the Brewer's Corner with a spicy new take on Azorius Tokens, Mono Black Aggro, Jeskai Control, and a little Grixis Reanimator.
Rebels, we're proud to announce that we've partnered with TOA Magic on our State of the Meta series. For those of you who aren't already using TOA Magic for your paper Magic tournament needs, click the link below in our description to head on over after the video and check out their store.
TOA Magic can deliver all your cards in one package with free tracked shipping on every order and over 1 million fulfilled orders to date.
Oh yeah, now on to our Tier 1 archetype breakdowns, starting with Domain.
So congratulations to David Ferroni for winning the 43-player WPNQ over in Marate, Italy. Again, I apologize if I butcher these names. With this build of Domain Ramp. Let's note that this build has embraced playing Temporary Lockdown with a full play set of Beanstalk in the main, embracing the tension point and design between the two while acknowledging that each has its place. The other two flex slots that we see here are the single copy of March and the lone copy of Elish Norn, Mother Machines. Now, Elish makes sense. She's a mirror breaker, and if you manage to shut down that first wave of Boros Convoke, she'll do a pretty decent job of locking them out and ignoring all those ETB triggers. Meanwhile, over in the sideboard, we note 3 copies of Malira the Living Cure, signaling that Bant Toxic may be alive and well, but this build of Domain is prepared for it. Now, I love where this list went personally. A strong use of the flex slots to combat the current meta, basically by acknowledging that yes, there are some matchups where you need to grind with that Beanstalk, and there's some matchups where you just have to hit lockdown on 3. So it's done that nice job of splitting the hedge between the two.
Oh yeah, I feel the same way. Now, despite what they're saying online about this deck, it certainly hasn't gone away. Do you have a theory as to why players have largely begun to call this deck solved in the discourse, and do you share that opinion?
I mean, when they say solved, I think what they mean is there is a set number of flex slots and there isn't much innovation to be done within the archetype. I generally disagree with that as a rule, because I've seen, like, for instance, last year's Player of the Year, Simon Nielsen. We watched how he modified what people were doing with Domain and pushed it up the curve with Invasion of Zendikar, and everybody thought it was solved by that point, and then he came in and wrecked a Pro Tour with it. So is an archetype ever really solved until rotation? I don't think so. There's just differences in how to build, and whether or not those differences matter will depend completely on the metagame.
I think that's a great way to view things, good attitude to have about it. All right, now let's move on to the next archetype, Golgari Midrange.
Tazio smashed through a 66-player MTGO challenge this past Saturday with Golgari Midrange, bringing this archetype into the limelight at long last. For those wondering why now, after so many months of being stuck in Tier 2 land, I think the answer came down to a shift in the format that finally favored what we're trying to accomplish with a mid-range grinder of a deck. With the entrance and continued push from Boros Convoke, we're seeing more and more main board hedges to combat what it's trying to do, including the rise of Azorius Control as an archetype. Now, Golgari Midrange is well positioned to beat both of them. It can outgrind Control, outmuscle Aggro, and go punch for punch against Rafine-based Esper Midrange archetypes. So long as Domain doesn't come roaring back to a 25% plus meta share, the age-old rock archetype will continue to be a viable path moving forward. And personally, I look at this list and I love that 3-1 split of Nightclubber to Path of Peril. Like, you know it comes in for those deep Cavern Bats against Convoke and really forces the issue for them on how much they can afford to overextend in the early game. And that's that beautiful catch-22 that you're looking for in most of these rock-based decks.
Oh yeah, I actually love seeing this deck back on top, especially in light of the fact that Convoke and Control are kind of like the two sides of the meta, sandwiching it in between. But what does the return of Frillback to the main board signify for this deck?
I think it signifies where the format's at. Frillback is so good when you have a format that is going to reward all three modes. And you do right now. You have Slogurk making a rise, which is leading to that exile the whole graveyard being a very relevant factor. You've seen some different reanimation strategies too, which again, Frillback just punishes. But normally the issue is you don't want to run things like Unlicensed Hearse in the main necessarily because it's so narrow. And Frillback doesn't have that issue. You can acknowledge that it's good against red decks for that gain 4 life. You can acknowledge that against mid-range strategies, there's going to be artifacts and enchantments you need to blow up. And against those graveyard-centric strategies, it really comes in huge there. Now, when only one of those modes is typically good and sometimes none of them are, you don't want it in the main board. But right now, all 3 of those modes are relevant across the diverse metagame we have. So that's why it's making a comeback, in my opinion.
Right. The life gain too against red, blowing up graveyards, graveyard hate, artifacts and enchantments. Yeah, that's all relevant. Talk to us about this next archetype, Dimir Aggro.
So here we see Oscar Pachesa smash through a 23-player RCQ in New York on Saturday with the latest iteration of Dimir Aggro, and I'm all about it. The Ledger Shredders in the main seem incredibly well positioned at the moment. The Cryptic Coats give this deck a grindy, unblockable edge that it's wanted for so long. The 2 copies of Spell Pierce in particular seem strong with all the mid-range soup pushing 3 to 5 mana Wrath effects main board currently. Now, the curve on this deck is low, efficient, ready to snowball with Gix as a 3 of in the main, and honestly the only shift I'd consider making is dumping that 4th Restless Reef for the 4th Underground River just for consistency and speed, because otherwise this just looks like a tournament ready deck, which it's already proven out once, and well done Oscar for that. But I want to take a moment here. When we look at what it's doing in the sideboard, you see those 3 Glistening Deluge and you see the 3 Tishana's Tidebinders. And you can see how this deck is already positioned to go up against Convoke. It's positioned for Bant Toxic with the Deluge, but it can also go play the mid-range game with those Tidebinders and deal with those Atraxas, the Archangels. Like, I love the way they're splitting this, and they're making sure that they are prepped for either scenario.
Oh, yeah. There's one particular card I want to ask about. Can you explain for the viewers who may be less familiar why Cryptic Coat is pretty much a must-have against Control and how the card works in general?
So I think the beauty of Cryptic Coat is that it's so difficult to deal with. You basically have to get to a place where they are going to tap down, and if they don't, the moment you try to remove it, they just bounce it back to their hand. And in the meantime, they're getting a 3/2 with Ward 2 that's going to be able to just unblockably keep hitting you. So imagine you're just playing this for 3 mana, and then it's a bolt to turn until they deal with it. And when they deal with it, they have to deal with you tapping down and giving them an opening to like march it off the board with an exile-based removal. Because anything short of them being able to blow it up and you being tapped out, you're just going to do it again. You're just going to return it. You're going to replay it. You're going to return it. You're going to replay it. It's a huge problem, and it gets under Disdainful Stroke. So there isn't an easy out there either. Like, they have to have exactly what they need on the counterspell end.
Wow, yeah. Brewers beware. Be on the lookout for this card. Talk to us about the next archetype, Slogurk Landfill.
So this archetype is going to have a lot of different ways that people name it. I'm calling it Slogurk Landfill. Some people call it Reclamation. It doesn't really matter. The point is you're dumping a bunch of lands in the graveyard. That's why I'm going to call it Landfill. Now, Alex Yetsenko took down a 19-player RCQ in Virginia this past weekend on the back of the new hotness in Standard, which is Slogurk. Now, we've all seen various Slogurk builds over the past year or so, each trying to capitalize on the creature that combines with your spell lands, quote-unquote, to loop various effects. However, welcome to an era that even I didn't think we'd ever be at. Like, this era is a reason to run 68 cards, because our entire goal is to loop Jace for a mill win condition through Slogurk, Takenuma, and Reclamation effects. So, first of all, we talk about, like, why 68 lands. It's because we need that many fetchable lands. Like, this deck runs 36 lands. Take that in for a moment. That's 36. The last time I played that many lands in any deck was a vintage fast bond deck years ago. Fear not, though. You've got 12 fetches that'll thin it out while gaining you small amounts of life. And when you hit Reclamation, you get to do it all over again, and then again, and then again. So, again, we don't have a ton of time to go through all the different ways that this deck interacts. Take an hour, goldfish it. Seriously, just sit down if you have it in paper and goldfish it. See how those triggers hit. You'll get a feel for it pretty quickly, and it's hot for a reason. Like, this is a really interesting archetype that people need to pay attention to moving forward.
Oh yeah. The deck perplexes me, quite honestly. I don't think I've figured it out or how to pilot it like 100%. I think it's going to take some time to break. Members of our Discord have been calling it the 68 card special, in fact. So talk to me. This deck kind of breaks some rules on deck building. Do you think that's appropriate for the meta? Do you think this shifts how we think about deck building at all?
Traditionally, no, it doesn't shift how we're going to make most decks, but I love that there are exceptions that prove the rule. You know what I mean? And this is one of those exceptions where it does not make sense to have 60 cards because you need those 8 extra lands and you need to have them fetchable. And that's the point, is you're playing so many fetch lands and you're intending to use Reclamation to bounce them all into play again and again and again. You're going to run out of targets way too quickly if you don't have those 36 lands. And then you're just sacrificing them to gain a life, but you're not getting the extra mana that you want to get to build to that quick Takenuma loop with Slogurk. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to loop yourself into enough mana to just go milli 15, milli 15, milli 15, milli 15. Just ding, ding, ding. You only need 3 typically, and you'll get there.
Yeah, this deck is wild. Y'all should really try it out. All right, talk to us about the next archetype, one we do expect in Tier 1, Esper Midrange.
So Esper Midrange continues its standard campaign with a win at Krypton Comics this past Saturday in a field of 24, piloted by Donnie Peck. Now, this is the part where I get to eat some crow for saying I didn't believe No More Lies belongs in the archetype. At this point, the results have categorically proven me wrong on this front, so to our viewers, my bad on this one. Outside of No More Lies officially replacing Make Disappear in this archetype, we see the usual staples, with a 2-1 split of Emperor to Shelley and a 3-1 split of Virtue to Aclazotz in the main. Let's also note that those 2 Doorkeeper Thralls sitting on the sideboard are just excellent for Convoke. And curiously enough, there is a Kutzil's Flanker making an appearance, and I think part of the reason that the Flanker is there is Slogurk, because it does just flash in, exile the library or exile the graveyard, and that is an extremely powerful thing to do when they go 4 mana reclaim, and you go, you have nothing to reclaim. So you might see more of those moving forward. But, I mean, Esper Midrange, it's been around for a long time. The trophies just keep on coming, letting the world know this one's here to stay. So make sure you're ready for it.
Absolutely. I just want to ask about one slot change. We have seen in the past few weeks Gix in the 3-drop slot, just kind of being a redundant source of card advantage. What does Wedding Announcement in this slot do instead for the deck that Gix doesn't? Why would you pick Wedding Announcement over Gix?
So where I want the two kind of dials back to the old Explorer argument for like how do you outgrind the grindy decks. Gix is great against more of the control-based stuff where they have to answer multiple sticky threats and then you just slam a Gix and start drawing cards. Because if they don't answer your 1 and your 2 drop and then you slam a Gix and they don't have the answer for that as well, like they can stumble and you just bury them, right? Wedding Announcement saying we're going to trade punches. You're like, I'm not going to bury you in card advantage. You're going to have answers. You're going to have interaction early. That Gix isn't going to make it through even a turn before it gets killed. And in that scenario, what we want to do is we want to present 3 threats for 1, which is what Wedding Announcement's there for. It's saying, okay, here's something even stickier than a Gix. Good luck removing it before it gives me so much advantage that now all of those early drops are also a threat with the Anthem. And sometimes you're drawing a card or 2 off Wedding Announcement anyway, just by having those early drops that can swing through and give you 2 creatures attacking per turn.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that does make a ton of sense. All right. Well, that does it for Tier 1. Let's drop down into Tier 2, and I'll open things up with the first archetype that we have, Rakdos Midrange. So TKY took down a 20-player preliminary over in Japan this past weekend with Rakdos Midrange. Now, while normally we toss trophies over a Tier 1 land, we haven't been able to verify the importance of this event, whether this was an RCQ qualifier or not. So given those lower numbers, we're going to leave this in Tier 2 for now. Note that this deck has gone much lower in the curve, focusing much of its attention on the 2-drop slot. 2 main board Duresses seek to gut control lists early. Harvesters and Bats, along with the 1 underdog, make up the slate of creatures that drop before Gix, ready to enable it. You have 3 main board Lilianas. These do point to a need to attack other mid-range lists and provides a sort of card advantage for the deck when you consider that you're forcing your opponent to discard. Preacher is a value piece. Full set, no surprises there. It's able to dodge 3 damage removal that's very common in the meta, and cut downs significantly enough. Geological Appraiser, still a centerpiece of this list, assuring that you get that value in the mid game, and that really signifies what the deck values is outvaluing your opponent, having more board, more cards, all of those.
So Max, when I look at this list, I'm noting that there isn't like a trumpeting Carnosaur. There's just a lone Bonehorde Dracosaur at the top end. Is the key to this deck lowering the curve and eschewing the previous staples such as like Cruelty of Gix and the entire reanimation strategy?
It does indicate to me that the meta has kind of shifted more towards aggro, mid-range. In light of that shift, I think this deck wants to, follow along, outvalue, outplay the other mid-range decks still, but also go over the top of those hyper aggro lists. So it wants to be able to respond relatively quickly, way more quickly than it has in the past to Convoke and Toxic. I think Dracosaur only really has an effect if it can stick, right? And I think Dracosaur is having trouble sticking. So perhaps relying on those bigger threats, more time to get them out, has allowed the other decks to slip in underneath of Rakdos midrange. So I think these current shifts to a lower curve attempt to remedy that.
That makes sense. I mean, we have these scenarios where Disdainful Stroke is just so powerful, but against this list, can you even validate bringing it in, Like for 4 Geological Appraisers and 1 Dracosaur, I'm not bringing it in for that. So I see what you mean. Sometimes you just got to go low to dodge the hate and push through. Okay. Well, let's swing over and talk about Boros Convoke.
Janus made to the top 4 of a 66-player MTGO challenge this past Saturday with Boros Convoke. We saw a smattering of Convoke players in various top 8s actually over this past weekend as well, but this list came the closest in our estimation to where an ideally tuned iteration of the deck should look like. In my mind, the 1-drop slot is mostly cemented, right? You got the 2 Yodian frontliners supplementing full Novice Inspectors, full Voldaran Epicures, all good targets for Gleeful Demolition. 3 of the cases make up really the initial removal suite for this deck, and rightfully so. Those are good removal cards. This card not only has the potential to take away that one, wall that keeps you from attacking, but it also enhances the board in a game plan where you're really wanting to attack every turn that you possibly can. Note that Thran Portal has sort of become a staple of this color pair, specifically because you want to have access to red and white mana on turn 1, and the Festivities is wonderful for the mirror and Bant Toxic, while Urbrass Forge has also become a bit of a staple against control.
Truly. And honestly, the part of the reason I like this list is it's literally 2 slots away from where mine is. So I've got some bias going in. I'm not going to lie. Like I looked at this, I'm like, yep, that's exactly where I ended up too, Janice. So yep, we're featuring it.
You took something down, fair enough.
But I look at this, and I think the biggest question everybody's been asking about Boros Convoke is Sanguine Evangelist a trap?
I think that's a really good question. There are a couple slots in the 2 and 3 drops that people dance back and forth between. This is one of those. I do believe it is somewhat a trap, though. I personally have opted for 1 copy in my list in a flex slot, but my preference is actually for a Nimpa Call and a 3rd War Leader's Call. My reasoning here is that you want immediate impact on your damage output from your 3-drop cards. War Leader's Call, boosts the board that you already have right away, and enables bigger damage output on that turn, and also creates more damage later when you play creatures and tokens, which you do in this deck a lot. Evangelist does create a token, but you're already doing that in the 2-drop slot with Resolute Reinforcements, creating those 2 tokens. And it does it for 1 cheaper. It isn't until the next turn after Evangelist comes down that it can, swing with Battle Cry, give you that boost. So really, for my money, when I'm playing in the 3 on turn 3, I want to be able to swing right then and there, get some extra damage out there, and get some bonuses. You do get that with the Nimpa Call, a little bit more than you do with the Evangelist.
See, I'm in agreement with you there, and I'm on a 3-3 split of case to War Leader's Call, and part of this is that Sanguine Evangelist is great if you expect regular removal, but if you're dealing with wraths, if you're dealing with exile-based removal, it takes too long. War Leader's Call is going to give your entire team a bump that turn. Evangelist, you got to wait 1 turn, and that gives them way too much time typically. So I'm much more on board with this. Like, let's do 3 War Leader's Call and like 2 Nimpa Call. I haven't tried out the Nimpa Call, but I think that is some hot tech to mess around with, because you're right, it's immediate damage, and this deck is all about immediate payoffs.
Oh yeah.
Well, with that,
100%.
let's slide it on over and talk about Azorius Control.
Oh boy, has this archetype risen in recent days as a response to the meta. The infamous Jabberwocky, who we've mentioned before, made it to the top 8 of 66-player MTGO challenge this past Saturday with the ever-divisive Azorius Control archetype. Quick shout out as well to Athena the Bun. Narrowly missed the top 8 if you saw that action live of the 124-player Birds of Paradise Standard Open hosted by Niles Rivers. made 11th place though, so shout out there. Full set of March indicates here in this deck in the 1-drop slot the need for single target removal, even when the game plans call for board wipes. I still think that card is key. One key play, for example, that Athena talked to me about that day, actually, that she was participating, is she loves to use March on the token, on the artifact token, that typically Convoke will use to blow up with Gleeful Demolition, as they do. So it's a wonderful play that Azorius Control loves to do. Take that away. Normal Lies has also become a staple of this deck. Card positioned well right now. Full set of this card in here. You're also going to see Deduce, ideal for playing on the end step. You gain your card advantage. And of course, the typical exile-based board wipes.
So, Max, when I look at that deck, I see 10 Wrath effects split up across 4 different Wraths. You know, you've got your temporary lockdowns, you've got your depopulates, you've got your sunfalls, you got your farewells. That is a crap load of Wrath effects. Is that the number? Is that like a correct number in Standard right now, though?
I think maybe slightly more important than how many is really the types of Wraths, right? Sure. Really, with a resurgence in mid-range, we've really started to see a shift towards Depopulate, that 4-drop slot Wrath, and Sunfall, with the early game temporary lockdown kind of taking a back seat a little bit. And you're kind of just confronting those early pieces with March of Otherworldly Light, and then the 2 copies of temporary lockdown that you have, and then cleaning up later on in the match. This is surprising in light of the fact that Azorius tends to really covet that 4-drop slot, right? We see Memory Deluge, we see Wandering Emperor there instead. So it's actually a tension point for me when I'm playing Azorius Control. But then again, I'm really not the control mage. You'd have to talk to mages like Athena about that. But yeah, I think the type of Wrath is a bigger question than that.
That's fair. That's fair. Which Wrath do you want to bring to the party? Because you got like 18 to choose from in Standard right now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And with that, let's get over to a deck that doesn't love to see those early temporary lockdowns as Wrath effects. A little bit of Bant Toxic.
Oh, yeah. And this deck is quickly becoming a classic. Matthew Yakovina and Stamen made it to the top 8 of the 124-player Birds of Paradise Standard Open. It seems that most archetypes were well represented at this tournament, based on what I saw. So to see Bant Toxic do well is really a statement for the deck, considering what got play. We've already discussed the core of this deck in previous weeks, and there haven't been too many changes. The basics are life doesn't matter, right? They don't care about paying life to do things. As you try to breach the opponent's board, add poison counters, attack when you can, and when you can't attack, you use Rot Priest to be able to put those counters on the opponent. Rot Priest and Duelist really work in coordination and in tandem with each other. Fading Hope and March of Swirling Mist in particular make this easier, but Duelist also still brings the pain with that Toxic and Double Strike, so that's definitely still a threat. Note also the 2 thralls in the sideboard we discussed earlier, affecting enemy Convoke and Atraxa-based game plans.
So, Max, to me, the spiciest part of this list is that single copy of Mindlink Mech. I love that. That's some spicy tech. What's your ideal scenario for this card, though?
Right, when I saw that card, I was like, I had to think about it for a second. But the first thing that really comes to mind is crewing with Javan Duelist and getting in like all those poison counters, especially with evasion. Also, Venerated Rot Priest, right? If you happen to have that March of Swirling Mist, duplicate your Venerated Rot Priest, make it an even quicker match. So those are just the 2 things that jump out at me. I think a 1-of is perfect for this deck.
Fair. And with that, we get through all the tiers. Let's get over my favorite segment every week, Brewer's Corner. We're going to go ahead, kick things off with a little Jeskai Control. Now, this list was given courtesy of Harkonnen of the MTGR Discord. Thank you again. And just shout out in general, the MTGR Discord, it just keeps growing with people that watch these videos, want to come in, want to brew, want to have some fun. We love it. We love having you guys in there. It's amazing. So many ideas got shipped to me this week. I'm sorry for everybody who didn't manage to get one up this week. I will try to get it on the next week. It's just so much fun. There's so many cool ideas. This one in particular I like because I've been wanting to build Jeskai Control for a minute. You know, like you have Lightning Helix, you have the updated Mana League, you've got Zurgo and Ojutai. It just feels like there should be something there. And this one I think does a great job of acknowledging that. And looking at where it's positioned, I love it. Like, we still have those 4 marches that you see from the Azorius Control decks that are doing well. You still see the Sunfalls and the temporary lockdowns. And you have, I think, a stronger win con because Zurgo and Ojutai is damn near impossible to kill. Once you get that engine going, if you have the mana, it is so hard to interact with. Just a spicy list. I love what's going on here. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm truly surprised nobody's put that together before, that Zergo and Ojutai presents a really great late game win con for a control deck. Like, never put that together before, but I'm happy to see it.
Right? I mean, I've seen Athena the Bun try different iterations of it, but none of them ever quite popped. I'm really hoping this one does, because I think this one was really well constructed. But we're going to move on, and Max, why don't you tell us a little bit about Azorius Tokens?
All right, credit to Mao Diddy Mao of the MTGR Discord. Thank you again. You guys are awesome. So, Azorius Tokens. Love this archetype. I don't get to play it enough, quite honestly. Warden and Novice Inspector really do go great together, right? If you play them both on turn 2, for example, right away you can scry with the Warden. And scrying is a really good ability right now. So, it allows for all that powerful scry in the early game. Sets up a really nice curve out. Get Lost is good here as well. It gets rid of problematic wall pieces, you know, your Shellys, your Glisses, and you really don't mind the map tokens in light of the fact that your opponent is going to need them to play any kind of need their mana to play any kind of disruption. So needing mana to counter your go wide game plan. Speaking of which, when they do that, you have no more lies in this deck. Fits in really well. Backs up your board, allows you to continue playing past board wipes. And then this is also a Segovia deck, and Segovia really does set you up for bigger attacks later in the game, but also for laying down cards like Teferi or Archangel Elspeth, which is really where the value comes from in this deck. So I love to see a game plan throughout the early to mid to late game with tokens. That's really cool.
Yeah, and this one does that. This one has layers to it, and that's also uncommon. You know, typically token decks are so linear, they don't have a backup plan of any shape or form, but this one feels like it's got some grind to it, and you love to see it. You love to see it.
Yeah.
Let's move along, though, and talk a little bit about Mono Black Aggro. So, credit to King Louie of the MTGR Discord for shooting us this list. I believe they actually took down an RCQ with this. And it was designed specifically for an RCQ that the meta was anticipated to be Esper Midrange and Boros Convoke. And you can see where this would be a problem for each of those. Like, you are low to the curve, you are able to interact, and Archfiend, like Archfiend of the Dross, has got to be a nightmare, especially post-board, when you see those 3 Path of Perils and 2 Grixis commands, where, you know, they play out Gleeful Demolition, 3 or 4 different creatures, you go Path of Peril, lose 10. Lose 10. If Archfiend is, you know what I mean? Like, that is an insane amount of loss of life. You can just get them on that like a Massacre Worm effect. And I've been waiting to see if there was an aggro build that could really capitalize with Archfiend. And I think we're seeing it. You know, I also love that this one has the Graveyard Trespassers. In a world filled with Slogurk, I want to be removing things from graveyards. And having that just naturally built into your main board so that you don't need a lot on the sideboard to add to that, it's got a lot of interesting hedges. And I think it's just incredibly well designed. So credit to King Louie on that one. Well played.
Oh,
well played.
Thank you, King Louie, for that one. We really appreciate that. And I just want to comment real quick. I love seeing Phyrexian Flesh Gorger in a deck again. Like, that card got forgotten about.
Yes, love to see that.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about our last deck for Brewer's Corner, Grixis Reanimator. Very appropriate name, by the way. Credit to Necro from the Rebellion Discord. Thank you again. You guys are amazing. Grixis Reanimator really does a little bit more than your average Reanimator deck. I've been seeing this one on ladder lately. Enabling your beefier creatures, cards such as Atraxa and Breach the Multiverse. Conspiracy Unraveler is really the new card here. The Unraveler in particular enables even more tricks. You know, once you reanimate this card, you're able to collect evidence instead of paying the cost for something like Breach the Multiverse. Of note also, we've got the cards that help you get things into your graveyard, whether it's by discarding or milling. You've got Picklock Prankster, and you've got the new Steam Core Scholar, allowing you to discard 2. But the card that's I really want to highlight is Ill-Timed Explosion. Oh my god. Like, this is a board wipe, especially for the lower curve decks, but also a way to discard, also a way to get cards. I mean, like, this card is a big package all in one, fits really well into a Grixis Reanimator pile.
Yeah, there's something about going Ill-Timed Explosion and let's discard Atraxa to blow the board that just feels good. You know? Like, it's... I love it. I love it. And that's going to bring us to our final segment, predictions for the upcoming week. Now, Max, we've looked at 13 archetypes tonight. What are your predictions going into week 5 of Karlov Manor Standard?
All right, so I predict that we're going to see a shift back to mid-range and combo strategies, much like what we actually saw in that Grixis brew just now. When the metagame tends to dictate a fight between control on one hand and aggro on the other, it's typically mid-range and combo decks that benefit. The rise this week of Slogurk, Golgari Midrange certainly reflect that. As brewers perceive a more open meta, they'll use the space to fill with ideas unexplored in the current popular archetypes. Can one of these ideas break through? This meta is far from solved. We actually may have to wait until rotation for the inevitable crunch of the meta, so to speak, where only a few archetypes become viable and bring any sort of win rate guarantees, and then the rest of them are considered untested. But even then, will the meta really condense the way it has in the past, past rotations for Standard? I don't know. Time will tell. But this time, new mechanics, a reliance on a higher number of staples from more recent sets, really put the format on a trajectory that I think is markedly different from Standards of the past. Honestly, it's an excellent time, an exciting time to be a brewer for sure. But how about you, Riktus? Where is this format headed?
I mean, I look at this format and I see Domain, Esper Mid, and a rotating aggro slot that seems to be the norm for the meta at this point. To that end, we've seen a lot of hedges in the form of Big Elish Norn, Doorkeeper Thrall, and Ledger Shredder across multiple archetypes to push back against Boros Convoke and Bant Toxic as viable aggro choices. So do we see those hedges move to the sideboard or get cut entirely for more interaction with the non-aggro portion of the format? That remains pretty unclear, especially as Slogurk is emerging on a graveyard-centric combo list, forcing additional sideboard slots to be given to unlicensed hearse and other grave hate. But, I mean, that's the beauty of the metagame. With this much diversity, every week the puzzle gets a little closer to solved and the lists get a little tighter on their numbers. So stay tuned as the MTG Rebellion continues to cover the evolution of the meta for you.
Oh yeah. Thank you for your support by watching this video all the way to the end. I want to give a special shout out to our members who have already joined the Rebellion and support our content. And if you'd like to support what we do, be sure to turn on your notifications, join us for our premieres, and like and subscribe. It's really the best way to let us know that you want to see more competitive MTG content. Now, for those of you who can do a bit more, feel free to check out our merch below, join the Rebellion as a member while you're at it. At just $3 a month, you can gain access to our sideboard guides, giving you a competitive edge over your opponents in the most popular formats. This week, also, tune into the Rebelcast's latest episode. I actually have a new co-host, Athena the Bun. This next episode, we are going to discuss whether there should be any bans in Standard.
And until next time, Rebels, untap, upkeep, resist.
Resist.